My sister-in-law slapped me in front of everyone at the party because I accidentally pushed her, but my husband took her side, and now he's surprised about the divorce. Last week, I went to my mother-in-law's house for a family dinner. It was supposed to be a nice evening, just like any other family gathering. My husband Ray and I were both excited as we arrived. The atmosphere was warm and cheerful, and everyone was having a good time. After dinner, the mood became even livelier. The adults started drinking, relaxing, and enjoying the night. As the night went on, my mother-in-law played the perfect hostess, refilling wine glasses and keeping the mood upbeat. At one point, music started, and some of the adults began to dance. My husband and I joined in, letting ourselves get caught up in the fun. I didn't notice that my sister-in-law was right behind me. I was moving to the beat of the music, and at one point I accidentally bumped into her. This caused my wine glass to tip over, and before I could react, the wine spilled all over her dress. It was a total accident. My sister-in-law let out a scream of horror, and I also had a white dress on, which was now completely soaked in deep red wine. I immediately started apologizing, explaining that it was an accident, but I could see that she was furious. My husband, Ray, quickly grabbed some napkins and brought them over to help his sister try to dry the wine. I kept apologizing, trying to help clean up the mess when she started shouting at me. She was clearly trying to release all her frustration. "Are you blind?" she screamed at me. "Can't you see what's going on around you? How can you be so clumsy to spill your wine on me?" I kept apologizing again and again, trying to fix the situation while she kept calling me careless and stupid for ruining her dress. Then, at one point, fueled by the wine she'd had earlier, I finally responded, "I'm really sorry, but I don't have eyes on the back of my head. How was I supposed to know you'd be right behind me like a ninja?" My husband, Ray, chuckled at my comment while we kept trying to clean her dress. The idea behind my words was to make a joke to ease the tension, but it had the opposite effect. My sister-in-law became visibly stiff, and all I managed to do was make her even angrier. The next moment, before I could process what was happening, she slapped me hard across the face. The sound of the slap was loud enough for it to echo, and my cheek burned. This wasn't just a simple slap, it was a pretty strong one. Everyone went silent, which only made it worse. On top of that, my sister-in-law kept yelling, "How dare you talk back to me? I can be wherever I want. You should have been more careful. I can't believe you ruined my dress. Do you even know how much this dress costs? Do you know the brand I'm wearing? You can't even afford something like this." I was mortified, standing there with all eyes on us. My husband, Ray, didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching silently, while his sister reprimanded me in front of everyone. At that moment, my mother-in-law and father-in-law quickly intervened to try to calm my sister-in-law down. My mother-in-law tried to gently console her and take her away so she wouldn't make a bigger scene, but my sister-in-law didn't want to hear any of it. Her voice rose again, louder this time. "This was my favorite dress," she practically shouted, shaking with rage. "It's completely ruined because of you. Look at this stain, it's never going to come out." She turned her head to glare at me again with fury. "You're going to replace it, and I will make sure you pay every last cent for it," she added, her tone growing even more bitter. "Although I doubt you can even afford something like this with your pathetic salary." I think this is what hurt me the most because she was trying to humiliate me, especially with comments about my salary. To give some context, my sister-in-law married a wealthy man shortly after graduating from college. He's significantly older than her, 13 years older, and is about 9 years older than Ray and me. He's a professional from a wealthy family, putting her in a very comfortable financial position. Since getting married, she's lived a life of luxury and thinks the rest of us are poor. The most ironic thing is that she identifies herself as a traditional wife. Yes, you read that right. She calls herself a traditional wife. Unlike us, she spends much of her time making TikToks about how her purpose in life is to serve her husband and prepare to be a good mother for their future children. For her, being a traditional wife is a badge of honor. But she views the rest of the world and everyone else through a lens of privilege and arrogance. The irony is that they have so much money, she doesn't even have to do anything for her husband. His employees do it. It's not like she waits for him with dinner after a long day at work. My sister-in-law's husband, being the wealthy man he is, has given her everything she wants in life. So I understand perfectly that her dress must have been really expensive. Honestly, I felt terrible about spilling wine on it. I truly felt bad. But even though I could have been more careful, I really wonder if my mistake deserved such a reaction. Did it justify her slapping me in the face, humiliating me in front of everyone, shouting at me and insinuating I was poor? I may not be as rich as her husband, but I do pretty well in life. I'm not poor like she claims. Of course, compared to her lifestyle, anyone would seem poor by her standards. I tried to explain this, but she just kept going with her rant. I could feel my blood pressure rising. Her voice was becoming shriller, which was only making me more irritated. She was so close to my face, almost pinning me down with her stare. During all of this, I didn't quite realize it, or maybe I didn't want to, but I felt my hand move before my brain could react. I slapped her back hard, so hard it left her completely silent. It was probably even worse than her slap. Her cheek turned bright red. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Can you stop yelling for a moment so I can speak? I'll replace your dress. So stop screaming about how I can't afford this. You've never had to spend a cent without someone else paying for it. So who are you to call me poor?" It was clear that my sister-in-law was struggling to process what I had said. She looked furious, but before we could argue any further, my mother-in-law pushed me away from her. "Get away from her!" she shouted, while she started checking my sister-in-law's face. My husband, who had remained silent during his sister's tantrum, suddenly joined his mother and began to worry about his sister. They were both suddenly full of concern for her, while she started crying loudly, lamenting how disrespectful I was and how no one had ever slapped her before. Maybe that was the problem. My father-in-law, visibly alarmed, rushed to get ice for her face as if I had caused some irreparable damage to his daughter. The way they were reacting was almost surreal. It was like my sister-in-law had been shot or had a grenade explode in her face. My slap had been strong, but not that strong. The melodrama was overwhelming. Suddenly, my husband Ray turned against me. "You had no right to slap my sister," he yelled. "This is all your fault. The only thing you had to do was apologize and keep your mouth shut." Trying to defend myself, I said, "We were dancing. Your sister came up behind me and I didn't see her. I spilled my wine on her dress by accident. I apologized over and over, but what justified her slapping me in the first place?" At this point, I was determined to defend myself because it felt like everyone was against me. Before Ray could respond, my sister-in-law snapped and answered, "How dare you slap me? Do you even know who you're messing with? I'm going to sue you for assault. You're going to pay for this, remember that." Then she turned to Ray, yelling at him too. "What a disgrace. How can you not control your wife? She has no right to say anything to me after what she did." Without waiting for anyone to respond, she stormed off to the bathroom to change, with my mother-in-law following close behind to console her, like her personal servant. I stood there in the middle of the room, surrounded by everyone who was whispering and clearly talking about me. Somehow, they saw me as the villain in this situation. That's when Ray turned to me, frustrated and disappointed. "You need to go home," he said. "What?" I asked, feeling stunned. It seemed so crazy that he would say this, especially in front of everyone. I couldn't believe my own husband was telling me to leave. "You've done enough," he continued. "You've caused a scene, and my sister needs to calm down. She can't do that while you're still here. You shouldn't have slapped her back. In fact, you shouldn't have done anything, no matter what she did to you. You're older than her. You should act more maturely. I'm sure she didn't mean to slap you, but you made things worse by slapping her back. You just escalated the situation unnecessarily." My father-in-law intervened, agreeing with Ray. "It's better for you to leave," he ordered. They were kicking me out of the house, not just my in-laws, but also my own husband. I couldn't believe he had completely chosen his sister's side, regardless of how unfairly I had been treated. I saw no point in arguing at that moment. I grabbed my things, quickly ordered an Uber, and left for home. During the ride, I could only think about how badly everything had gone. How had the night turned out like this? All I did was defend myself after being humiliated, slapped, and insulted. Was that really so unforgivable? And why didn't my husband Ray take a stand for me? I knew that for Ray, his little sister always came first. For instance, when I first met his family, it was during an informal lunch. I remember being nervous, but throughout the meal, my sister-in-law spent the entire time interrogating me about every detail of my life, my upbringing, my education, even my job. It didn't feel like a polite conversation, but more like an interrogation. I remember feeling confused by her intrusion. To be clear, both Ray's family and mine come from similar socioeconomic backgrounds. I was already working in the tech field, which paid me significantly more than Ray made in advertising. Despite all this, she acted as if I wasn't good enough for her brother. At one point, she openly said that Ray was a great catch, and that I should be careful if I were to get serious with anyone. Where was Ray during all of this? Sitting silently, of course. Not once did he speak up to defend me. He just let his sister say what she wanted without challenging her, as if it wasn't his place to intervene. After that lunch, when we were alone, I told Ray how upset I was. I explained that it wasn't fair for his sister to treat me like that, and more importantly, that he should have defended me. To be fair, he apologized at that moment. He said he hadn't even realized how his sister's behavior looked and excused her by saying she was just being protective of him. He told me he hadn't heard the whole conversation because he was distracted with something else. He promised that the next time he'd stand up for me, but over time his promise faded. In the beginning, he did try a little, but then he just let things slide, returning to his usual ways. However, this time, it was different. He had never been physical with me. When I got home, I waited for Ray to return so we could talk, maybe even argue if necessary, anything to address the chaos of the night. But he never came back. Instead, in the middle of the night, I received a voice message from him. He said his sister was still upset and that he, along with his mother and father, were going to take care of her, as if that wasn't already hard enough. He continued by saying that most of his family believed I was wrong, and if his sister moved forward with her threats of suing me for assault and emotional damage, he would have no choice but to support her because she was family. He didn't stop there. He told me I needed to offer my sister-in-law a sincere apology, one that would calm her enough to deter her from pursuing legal action. I know many people in my position might have given in. Perhaps they would have apologized, swallowed their pride, and admitted to something they didn't believe in just to keep the peace or avoid more conflict. But I couldn't. Deep down, I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. Yes, spilling the wine had been an accident, but I had apologized repeatedly. The slap I gave my sister-in-law wasn't unprovoked. It was a reaction to being humiliated, insulted, and physically attacked in front of everyone. If anyone needed to apologize, it was her. She had slapped me first. She had escalated the situation because she felt entitled. I knew that if she went through with a lawsuit, she wouldn't have a solid case. Her claims of emotional damage were, at best, laughable, given the circumstances. It was clear to me that her threats were just a power play, an attempt to make me beg for her forgiveness to soothe her bruised ego. But what hurt the most wasn't my sister-in-law's actions. It was Ray. Throughout this whole ordeal, he showed where his true loyalty lay. With his family, not with me. The fact that he could so easily side with her, even after all I had endured, said a lot. Not once did he ask if I was okay. He didn't seek me out or offer any comfort. Instead, he spent the night blaming me for everything, as if I were the sole cause of the chaos that night. As I listened to his voice message, I realized something painful but necessary. This wasn't just an issue with his sister or his family. It was an issue with him, with our relationship. So, the next morning, when I woke up and Ray still hadn't come home, I decided to pack my things and leave without leaving any notes or explanations. When Ray finally came home and found that I was gone, I imagined he must have been surprised. My phone started ringing with his calls. I answered, and he demanded to know where I was. There was no worry in his voice, no sign of distress or sadness, only anger. He yelled about how he didn't expect to come home and find the house empty, and how furious he was that I had left with all my things. Then, as if trying to justify his anger, he proudly announced that he had worked hard to convince his sister to come back with him to our house. His grand plan was for me to apologize to her face to face so the whole situation could be resolved. I couldn't help but let out a sarcastic laugh. Staying calm, I told him I was going to my parents' house and made it clear that I didn't plan on coming back anytime soon, as I had a lot to think about. I also told him very clearly that I wouldn't apologize to his sister for something that wasn't my fault. However, I added that if his sister wanted to apologize to me for her behavior, I'd be more than willing to listen. That wasn't what he expected to hear. He argued that, as my husband, I couldn't just leave like that. He called me rude and inconsiderate, demanding that I come home immediately. But I told him no. I also let him know that if his sister wanted to continue with her empty threats of suing me, she was more than welcome to try. The insults, the ugly words, were so painful that I don't even want to repeat them here, so now I'm at my parents' house. I've told them what happened, and my dad is completely on my side. He even scolded Ray for not defending me. However, my mom thinks I shouldn't have left my husband's side without talking to him first, and that communication is key to resolving our problems. So, according to her, I'm the bad one. Update 1. Today, I checked the price of the dress online and sent the money to my sister-in-law. I hope this puts an end to her complaints about the dress. I know many of you didn't want me to pay her, but I don't want to owe her anything. I ruined her dress, and I always intended to compensate her. It's what decent people do, and it's what I like to do. I even compensated her for the slap as well. I'd also like to clarify a few things that have repeatedly come up in the comments. First, as a woman, I know when another woman is deliberately trying to bother me. My sister-in-law has always had this inexplicable need to compete with me from the start, even though I've never seen her as competition. It's clear she's jealous of me for something, though I can't exactly pinpoint what. If I had to guess, it might be the fact that I've built a life and career for myself. Unlike her, I didn't marry a rich man to afford nice things or live a comfortable life. I've worked hard all my life to achieve everything I have, and I suppose this financial independence is something she resents. My sister-in-law married a rich man and seems to completely depend on him for the life she leads. While her husband gives her everything, he's also quite controlling since he's much older than her. She has complained to us in the past that he doesn't let her go out much with her friends or wear certain clothes he doesn't like. However, I don't feel sorry for her. This is the life she chose for herself. She likes to boast about her luxurious lifestyle, constantly reminding us how privileged she is. She brags about her vacations to exotic places, the designer clothes and handbags she buys, or how she doesn't have to worry about working because her husband takes care of everything. She spends her days lounging by the pool, getting her nails done, or doing Pilates. So, I don't understand why she resents me or sees me as competition when this is the life she always wanted. Secondly, my sister-in-law's husband wasn't present at the dinner that night. In general, he never attends any of our family events because he's too busy working. Moreover, the few times I've met him, he's very level-headed. So, I'm sure that if he had been there, my sister-in-law would never have slapped me. He never would have allowed her to throw a tantrum like that, since he cares a lot about his image in front of other people. Finally, after reading hundreds of comments on my post, I can't help but agree with everyone. My husband has always been a manipulator. For years, I wore rose-colored glasses, choosing to overlook the patterns that were always there. The truth is, he's constantly supported his family over me, and I allowed myself to believe this was how things should be. For example, Christmas and New Year's, year after year, we've celebrated these holidays with his family, despite my repeated requests to alternate and spend those important holidays with my family. He has always manipulated me by saying that his family comes first. Every time I bring it up, he insists that, as a good daughter-in-law, I must commit to and prioritize his family over mine. I've always felt that my needs, my family, and my traditions don't matter as much as his. In those moments, I've always felt guilty for wanting something different. I also blame myself for how things have turned out. Now, I realize I've allowed my husband to dictate my life for a long time. His lack of consideration for my feelings, combined with his subtle manipulation, has always kept me in a place of doubt. I've always questioned myself, wondering if maybe I was being too demanding or unreasonable. But I'm glad I came to Reddit with my story. Everyone here has finally opened my eyes to the truth. Finally, the reason my mom is somewhat on my husband's side is because she believes I shouldn't let a small issue, like my sister-in-law being rude or toxic, interfere with my marriage. Clearly, she doesn't understand how deep this problem is, or how much it's affected me. She doesn't see how my husband's behavior has drained me over time. However, she does recognize that the fact that my sister-in-law slapped me was completely wrong. Update 2. Ray and I finally had a face-to-face conversation in a neutral place away from home just so we could talk things through clearly. Almost 2 weeks have passed since my last update, and I decided it was time to address things with him. When we met, Ray started by apologizing. It took me by surprise because, honestly, I didn't expect him to apologize at all. He told me how happy he was that I had paid his sister for the dress. This was exactly what he had been waiting for, a genuine acknowledgement of the situation. But of course, Ray immediately followed up by saying that now it was my turn to apologize to his family. He explained that I still owed his sister an apology for humiliating her in front of everyone. He told me how his mother and sister had basically threatened to exclude him from the family unless I apologized to her. I stared at him in shock and asked, "What about when she slapped me first? Is she going to apologize to me for that?" Then, he tried to justify her behavior by saying that his sister was a little drunk and that seeing me spill red wine on her made her aggressive. He argued that anyone in her position would have reacted the same way and that I should have just stayed quiet and accepted her reaction. At that moment, I had to stop and take a deep breath. I wasn't sure whether I was more hurt or angry by how little he seemed to understand what had actually happened. I then told him that while I regretted slapping his sister because I don't like violence, I didn't regret defending myself. I wished he had supported me in front of his family, but he didn't. So, I had no choice but to defend myself. Maybe if he had done what was right, it wouldn't have come to that, but his repeated failure to defend me and his willingness to allow his sister to treat me like garbage made me realize something very important. I couldn't be with someone who didn't respect me. I listed every instance in which he and his family had treated me badly over the years, and how each of those moments had made me feel. I told him that as my husband, if he wasn't even brave enough to confront his rude sister, then I didn't see the point in continuing our relationship. Ray argued that he loved his family and didn't like to confront them, especially his precious sister. He pointed out that I was his wife, so he felt I should understand why it was important for him to keep the peace. I told him that being his wife didn't mean I was obligated to endure disrespect or mistreatment. Every time I stayed silent, I felt like I was choosing his family over me, and I was tired of being second place in my own marriage. As if that wasn't enough, Ray also informed me that his mother had basically uninvited me from all future family events at her house because she didn't want me near them. When I was surprised, Ray argued that it would be fine because I didn't like his family anyway. He said that from now on, for Christmas or New Year, I was free to spend time with my own family, just as I had always wanted, while he would be with his. I laughed in disbelief at how selfish it sounded, the audacity to ignore my feelings and try to manipulate me once again. At that moment, I told him that I had been thinking about a decision for several days, but after talking to him, everything had become clear. I wanted a divorce. I was done with this marriage. Ray's face immediately dropped, and he looked like he couldn't believe what I had just said. He argued that I wasn't thinking clearly, and that I was just speaking out of anger. Then he said, Fine. You don't have to talk about divorce if you don't want to. If you won't apologize to my sister, I'll talk to her and convince her to let it go this time. Since you're so set on this, but next time, don't slap my sister again." I told him I didn't care about any of that anymore. "It's over. My lawyer will contact you soon. Now you're free to spend the rest of your life catering to your mother and your sister, just like you've always wanted." Ray tried to argue more, but I simply stood up and left him there standing. I couldn't stay in a relationship where I wasn't valued, where my feelings didn't matter, and where his family always came before our marriage. Since then, Ray has been sending me voice messages, begging me not to go through with the divorce. He keeps saying that I'm destroying our marriage and that he wants to spend the rest of his life with me. I've muted his messages for now and will continue to ignore him in the future. Update 3. My mother-in-law has been persistently messaging me since I met with my husband a few days ago and asked for the divorce. She claims that I have no right to simply leave her son. According to her, I'm making him suffer unnecessarily out of spite. She firmly believes that I should fix things by moving back in with him, even if I'm unhappy in the marriage, and immediately apologize to my sister-in-law. So today, I sent her this message. Margaret, I've already met with a lawyer, so the divorce is happening whether you like it or not. Just a warning, I'm more than capable of exposing you and your spoiled daughter on social media now that I no longer care about your family. You and your daughter have done nothing but harass me throughout this marriage, and I have screenshots to prove it. So don't test me. Your son will be left alone now, because of you. I hope the next time he brings a woman home, you think twice before treating her like garbage. Since I sent this message, my mother-in-law has read it but hasn't had the courage to respond. I guess she finally realized I'm not playing around. As for my sister-in-law, she's blocked, so she can't contact me. Update 4. With the divorce now finalized a couple of months ago, and now officially away from that crazy family, I can share more things about them. First of all, I must say that my ex-brother-in-law helped me with my ex-sister-in-law. Upon hearing about the whole situation, he told her he wouldn't give her any money to sue me, and she couldn't use any of his lawyers who were busy with more serious matters. He also told her she should apologize to me, but that's something she never did. However, he did apologize to me on behalf of his wife by sending me a Christmas basket with various products and a handwritten card. The last thing I know about them is that they now live separately because my sister-in-law continued with that behavior. According to her card, this violent behavior has only appeared recently because she wanted to be a mother and hasn't been able to get pregnant. They tried for a year and were ready to try new methods, but she was filled with frustration because of it. She also slapped an employee at a spa shortly after the party I told you about and has had this kind of behavior for some time. That's why he moved into an apartment they have in the city while she stayed at the house. I learned this last part from my ex-husband during one of our divorce hearings. He tried to gain some sympathy for his sister, as if the fact that she was suffering somehow justified her actions. But she was already unpleasant before, and many people go through problems without treating the rest of the world badly. So, no, I don't feel any sympathy. The divorce is over, and I no longer need to worry about them or their toxic family behavior, nor their empty excuses for what they did.